what's most exciting is that there are things that you can do that have been shown in prospective clinical trials that will reverse aging. And that's, to me, where the kind of big new excitement is.
This is MedSpa Mayhem, the podcast all about the chaotic world of medical aesthetics. From Botox to lasers to IV bars, learn how to tell real versus fake, legal versus illegal, and safe versus potentially deadly. Hear the crazy stories inside the med spa world and find out what questions to ask and how to spot the people cutting corners. I'm your host, Dr. Kate D. Together, we explore the wild west of medicine that is the aesthetics industry. Hi, this is Dr. Kate D, and I'm speaking today with Dr. Richard Baxter. He is a board-certified plastic surgeon who originally went to undergrad at UCLA, then medical school at UC San Diego, and then did his plastic surgery training at OHSU down in Portland. We're going to be talking about his journey from traditional plastic surgery going forward into aesthetics and then ultimately longevity. So, Dr. Baxter, thanks so much for being on the program today.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. And by the way, thank you for everything you do with, trying to bring some sanity to the med spa business.
Well, I don't know. It's really missing a lot of sanity. I don't know if I can restore that, but thank you. I appreciate that. It's been quite a journey for me too. But I'm really interested in talking to you about your journey and where you've been. So for our audience, we didn't even meet back in the day, but back when I was in breast cancer and you were doing breast reconstruction and also, breast surgeries, lifts. There was one particular lift that I found really fascinating back then. I was like, ooh, I'm going to want that someday. But I first got to know you during that time. And so tell me a little bit about your journey, what you did when you started your practice and how that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, so plastic surgery practice, typically you start out doing everything. And so I did a lot of reconstructive surgery, some trauma surgery. You don't get a lot of cosmetic surgery work early in your practice. People tend to want their surgeon to have a little more experience before they sign up for their facelifts. But then the big arc of the practice is to go more for the cosmetic surgery, which is mostly what I do now. But we did a lot of breast surgery. And I do remember working with you back in the day.
There's this one thing with mesh that almost looked like an internal kind of bra. Does that still exist, or was that a phase?
Oh, that definitely exists. I was doing some of the first work with, and now the term internal bra has actually become fairly commonplace.
Oh, really? So I thought I just made that up. I guess I didn't.
No,
okay.
What we were doing was using acellular dermal matrix, which is very, very useful in breast reconstruction. And essentially is an internal bra to support an implant. Now we have different meshes available for breast lifts or breast reductions, and it's become a big part of my practice and I think a big part of plastic surgery.
Oh, that's very cool. And does it dissolve away then, or is it always there?
Yeah, the acellular dermal matrix, like alloderm, that transforms into living tissue that's permanent.
Oh, wow, cool.
The newer mesh materials are intended to dissolve, so they last about 18 months. And the body can build a layer of tissue in to support what it needs as it's dissolving. So I don't think the idea of a permanent kind of artificial mesh in the breast would be very appealing.
No.
Yeah.
Well, not as a recovering radiologist who doesn't want to see those on a mammogram, but yeah, I mean, as a 57-year-old mom of twins, I'll just say it's kind of appealing. So we'll talk maybe a little later about that. So you got more into cosmetic and facelifts and stuff. Do you also do non-invasive cosmetic stuff as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's been interesting just to see how that technology has developed. I think, as you know, there's so much that doesn't really work that well, or it might work a little bit in some patients. But if you've purchased one of these devices, you tend to have to pay for it by using it on everybody who's willing to have it done. And then you might end up having some disappointed patients and kind of wondering why it didn't work. So you have to match the technology to the patient. as you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so I got just to wondering, doing more of this stuff, what are we really sort of what are we treating? You know, when I'm doing a facelift and I'm lifting the loose skin and I'm lifting the tissues deep to the skin to reshape, and you just kind of get curious about the aging process itself. What's really driving this? Because if we want our results to last a long time, we need to be able to restore the tissue and not just reshape it. And that's given rise to what we know as regenerative medicine, and that's a big trend in aesthetics now. Just a kind of curiosity about what's behind that, and that kind of, I think, planted the seeds for my interest in longevity medicine. And then a few other things kind of came along the way that gave it some legitimacy, I think.
So let's talk about regenerative medicine a little bit, and then we'll talk about longevity. What modalities do you use in your practice? Do you use PRP, PRFM, Easy Gel, any of those things? What kinds of things are you using these
Yeah,
days?
yeah. So we were using PRP for a while, not as much of that anymore. Then exosomes were kind of the next thing, and I think they're a more potent version with all those growth factors. And then recently we've started using Airy Essence, which, as you know, is the purified platelet-derived growth factor. And that seems to be interesting as well. What I like about that is the option to be able to inject it into the skin, to actually get it into the dermis where it's really needed, instead of just trying to get it, in through the microneedling pores or something more topical.
Can you, for our audience, do you want to explain what the Airy Essence product is? Because we're actually demoing it like in a week and a half in my office. I'm kind of excited about that one.
Yeah, so when we do PRP, that's platelet-rich plasma or platelet-rich fibrin. You do a blood draw, you centrifuge it, you get a little fraction that has all the platelets in it, and the platelets have growth factors. They're what form a blood clot, but they also initiate the first phase of healing. So that's why they have all these growth factors, and they can be very rejuvenating to tissues. That's why they're used in sports medicine a lot, for example. And one of those, in fact, the primary growth factor in platelets is called platelet-derived growth factor. So this product is just pure platelet-derived growth factor. You don't have to do a blood draw. You purchase it, and so it's many times more potent. It is FDA cleared for use in orthopedics and oral surgery, so it can be
injected.
Yeah, it's just for aesthetic purposes, but there's nothing wrong with off-label if you know what you're doing and take good care of your patients.
Right. And I have covered that topic, but for anybody who hasn't heard me talk about what that means, when a product is approved by the FDA for use in the United States, it's always approved for a certain purpose. But then doctors, because they've been to med school and have extensive training, are allowed to use their medical judgment to use it for a different purpose, right? So if the doctor thinks that it's safe for use in a certain way, then, especially in a particular patient, then they can do that. As far as I know, other practitioners are not allowed to do that. I do believe PAs are allowed to do it under a doctor's guidance, and the different states are very different. But in any event, the reason I'm pointing this out is because you and I are allowed to do that. But most practitioners in the aesthetic world are really not legally allowed to use products off label. But anyway, so we're really excited about PDGF because, well, one, you don't need a blood draw, right? And two, it's pure. So you can just draw it up and inject it, right? You can't get an infection. Now, is there any chance of having a allergic reaction to this?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It would have to relate to whatever preservatives or whatever stabilizers they have in it, because the pure product itself
nothing else in it, right? So it would be like a preservative reaction, if anything. Okay, so it'd be quicker for one thing to prepare, right? You draw it up, you inject it. I mean, you'd be done in like 5 minutes. Yeah. And then it's more potent, right? It's going to be more potent than exosomes even.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, like, easier to get. So exosomes, I did a whole other podcast episode about a month and a half ago on exosomes. And those you have to collect because those are biologically created by cells. And so you have to collect those, and that's kind of very complicated. So presumably PDGF is going to be way, way easier to obtain. So that's very cool. So, and have you used that? Like, what kind of results are you seeing with that?
We've used it a couple of different ways. Right now, I'm still kind of reserving judgment. We have a couple of patients that we've used it after laser resurfacing. And we
Mm-hmm.
actually convinced one of them to do sort of a split face trial where she used it on one side and then the standard treatment on the other. We didn't really see much of a difference early on, to be honest, but that may not be the perfect application of it, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe our timing was a little bit off. We could have started it earlier, for example. But we have done some injections with it, and I think I want to kind of reserve judgment on that as well. But I think it's a product with a lot of promise, and I think the thing is, when you start out with something like this, is to really track your results and be honest about them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and just see what really works. Because just because something should work doesn't mean it always does.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. I like the idea of it, especially for tear troughs, especially for
Mhm.
my tear troughs, because
Yes.
I don't have any filler. I don't want to do filler anymore for me. And I hate getting blood draws. So if I could just have a really simple and no risk of vascular occlusion, no blood draw, simple injection, if I were to get the same results as, say, PRFM, which I've done, I really like the results from that, then I would totally do this instead. So that's been really exciting. Are there other regenerative medicine avenues that you've explored and continue to use?
Boy, that's kind of been the main channel in regenerative medicine, is sort of there's something called nanofat, which is a fat graft. You accept that it doesn't have the fat cells in it. It just has it's called the stromal vascular fraction. And that
Mm.
tends to be very rich in growth factors as well. And that's being used in conjunction with facelifts, where we'll add regular fat at a deeper level to restore the fat that's lost. But then this is injected more superficially to get restorative or regenerative effect in the skin itself. So,
That's
just
interesting.
it's also a natural thing, and you're there anyway. So,
Right, right, right. That sounds really cool. Can you use that to improve scars at all? If people have scars from previous procedures or complications or
oh, I would imagine so, although I haven't tried it for that.
okay, interesting. So can you talk a little bit about your journey into the longevity space and what you're doing now with that?
Yeah, so longevity medicine, I want to just define it. It's kind of beyond anti-aging. People have been talking about anti-aging medicine, anti-aging treatments for a long time, but none of them really address the aging process specifically. They're mostly things to help you look younger or feel better, but they didn't really address the aging process itself. And so, what longevity medicine is based on is the idea that you can actually measure aging. You can determine biological age. And then you have an objective way of measuring whatever interventions you're doing and how they're affecting your aging. And aging is, in this sense, longevity is not just about extending lifespan, it's about extending health span. Because at a
Right.
fundamental biological level, they're finding out that the things that drive all the diseases of aging are the same as the drivers of aging itself. So you solve the aging process, and you also keep people healthier much longer, instead of most of their healthcare issues spent in the last 10 years of their life and with chronic disease. So we're going to have to nerd out a little bit, which I know you love. So,
I do.
but the way you measure biological age is through what's called epigenetics. And epigenetics is like the software that controls your DNA hardware. So if you think about it, every cell in your body has exactly the same DNA. It's what makes you unique. But they're obviously different. And the way that they are different depends on which genes are turned on at which times, which ones are suppressed, and for how long. And that system is epigenetics. These are the proteins that kind of coil and uncoil the DNA and determine gene activation. So every time a gene is activated, the epigenetic system leaves a little tag on it. It's called a methylation tag. And those are permanent. They stay with you for the rest of your life. So you'll build up a lot of them of certain genes that are very active. Those can be counted. And this requires, it's basically AI, it's deep machine learning, because these are massive data sets. But they basically just took historical samples, the original versions of these. They took historical blood samples and then created an algorithm, and just said, go find the things that predicted how these people did. They knew how long these people lived, what diseases they got. And so they find the markers that determined what their lifespan was going to be.
So
And
I'm
that's how they
sorry,
make
are
the
you looking
biological
at
age.
which genes are most used, or are you looking at total methylation or both?
Yeah, it's gene specific. So
Okay,
they're determining which genes are the most active and
got it.
then which patterns are associated with aging and disease. And they've gotten much more sophisticated over the years. And there are lots of data sets that they have now to train these programs on. One's from a study called the Dunedin study from New Zealand, where they have a data set and medical records on people going back for more than 4 decades. So they're able to get massive data to train these algorithms. And these tests
Hmm.
are easily available now. They can be done. And so that's what drives longevity medicine practice.
It's done on a blood draw?
What's most exciting is that there are things that you can do that have been shown in prospective clinical trials that will reverse aging. And that's to me is where the kind of big new excitement is.
Okay, so that's super. So let's talk about those. So what are the some of those things that you can do? So we've
Well,
measured it. Okay, so you have somebody who comes in and you measure that. Do you use their baseline to direct what things you're going to recommend?
yes, the algorithms are getting better at telling you which things to do also. There are some things that are just generally effective. One of the things that one of the original studies used growth hormone and metformin, and that was able to reverse aging. We don't prescribe growth hormone because it has bad side effects.
Yeah.
It's abused and it's very highly restricted. But there are peptides, they're called growth hormone releasing peptides, that are available, and when they're used properly can be very effective. And we also use metformin a lot. Metformin is a very interesting drug. It's for your listeners, it's a type 2 diabetes drug. It's been around forever. It's very inexpensive, but they found a range of very interesting anti-aging or pro-longevity properties from it. One of these came from they have what are called biobanks of data. They're anonymized health data from large populations, and they can just kind of extract data out of them to see what worked. And they were comparing different diabetes medications, and they looked at metformin versus another medication, and then non-diabetics as a control. What was interesting is that the patients taking metformin had lower rates of cancer and lived longer than the control group.
Huh.
And so even though you were diabetic, if you were on metformin, you outlived non-diabetics and were
Wow,
healthy.
that's interesting.
So they're drilling into some of the reasons behind
What
that.
was the other drug that was compared to?
Oh, it was one of the sulfonylureas. I forget which
Okay.
one.
Okay.
But that one used what's called the UK biobank.
That's so interesting. And have there been studies related to this with the GLP-1s at all?
There are some in terms of their pro-longevity effects. Yeah. And I think that's, there's not as much data as we'd like, but some of the metabolic changes that we see seem to relate to those as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. So metformin is clearly one thing. So, I mean, would you take a normal, healthy person and put them on metformin then?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Should I be on metformin?
Well, I
Maybe.
think, there are pros and cons to be aware of. It doesn't work as well on everybody. It can have some effect on dampening the response to exercise in terms of muscle mass, but that's only in about half the patients. We don't know yet which half that is, but we have ways of counteracting that as well. So
Interesting. As you know, I work out a lot since I ran here to do this
yeah,
recording with you after workouts.
yeah,
And I would think that would be, I mean, you probably have some basic recommendations around lifestyle that also are important, which would apply to everybody, including working
yeah,
out, right?
yeah, definitely. I consider all that to be sort of the foundational stuff. We have all the lifestyle things, the sleep, hygiene, and exercise, and diet, things like intermittent fasting. That's all the foundation. And then the biohacking stuff is what you do above that. We
Hmm.
kind of get into the high-tech stuff.
Well, that's really interesting. Are there any other drugs or, medical things that you recommend for people, just
Well,
healthy people?
there are some fairly simple supplements. One is called alpha-ketoglutarate, and that seems to be pretty effective at reversing biomarkers. And that is just readily available, non-prescription, no bad side effects to it. So that's one. The other one is precursors to a molecule called NAD, which is really central in metabolism and particularly as it relates to the genes involved in aging. And that's become one of these sort of Wild West stories too, because it's, in fact, I think I saw an article this month where it was like the most trending thing was to, supplement your NAD. You can't take it directly as a supplement. You have to take a precursor to it that your body converts to NAD. But, we've been talking about this for years and all of a sudden it's trending. But, people are going in and getting...
People are putting it in IVs. That's one of the things people are doing out there, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's particularly effective IV.
Well, that's interesting.
There's not a lot of studies on it, but what there is says, it's not really doing anything beyond what you could get just by taking the supplements.
Okay, good to know.
That's my take on it anyway.
So do you do an intake and measure people's methylation, what other measurements that you do, and then make these recommendations and they actually implement it and then you follow up and measure again? I mean, are you able to actually see? You can't undo the methylation. So how do you, right?
Well, but you can, to some extent, reverse them. So that's what's interesting. You can take somebody's biological age and their methylation markers and you can start to march them backwards. So that...
Is there actually a correlation between marching those backwards and actually living longer or better or healthier?
There should be. But, to do a study where you're actually measuring lifespan as the endpoint would, we wouldn't be around to know the results of it.
Right.
But they should, because the algorithms are trained on the very first one of these biological age clocks was called the Grim Age Clock for the Grim Reaper, because it was predicting how long you would live. And, so then they got more sophisticated to look at how you're aging and what your rate of aging is and what specific things about you that are contributing to that. So they've gotten much better over the past 10 years.
Are there so the big thing right now, I have to say I haven't done my own deep dive into all the peptides, but people are really into peptides right now, right? So are there any other of those, peptide biologics that people are using that you think is actually effective, or are a lot of them just kind of a lot of hand waving?
No, I think they are effective. I think they're more effective in the context of sort of promoting good physiology rather than longevity per se. We're trying to kind of mimic that original clinical trial by not giving growth hormone, but by giving growth hormone releasing peptides. But whether that will work the same way has not been tested yet. But there are peptides are kind of everything. Hormones are peptides. Insulin is a peptide. Everything is peptides. And there's some that are pretty safe to use and reasonably effective.
And are most of them injected sub-Q then? And the way the GLP-1s are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So have you been doing this long enough to be able to have your own, patient database where like people come back and, oh my God, doc, like I'm playing tennis now and I really couldn't do that before?
Yeah, I don't know if we've had quite somebody who couldn't move and then is now playing tennis, but we do have patients who are definitely noticing a difference. And I can't say there's a large enough database to know that we're making everybody younger. Because, we have to be able to repeat the test after doing the intervention, and the test itself is not particularly inexpensive. So, and you also wonder about people's compliance too. So, but yeah, we're definitely seeing effects from it, and we're not seeing any bad effects. Certainly no adverse effects.
Well, that's awesome. I would think that, people who are seeking you out for this kind of thing are probably very highly motivated to change their lifestyle or to improve their lifestyle in ways that makes them feel better, have more energy. I think of it not so much as like prolonging life. I mean, I think medicine, since you and I have been in medicine, we've done a really good job. We meaning, the whole industry, right, has done a really good job of keeping people alive longer. But I think we're just prolonging their misery a lot. They're alive, but they're sick longer at the end.
Yeah.
I know for me, I did an internship in internal medicine, which was torture for me and I felt like a lot of the patients because, we were just prolonging the end. It just felt terrible being part of that. And I was one of those people who hung out with the patient and was talking to them and they were miserable. And I'd go back to the powers that be who didn't spend as much time with the patient and like, oh no, continue this therapy, do this, do that. And I'm like, oh my God, we're just torturing these people. And they're, just means they're dying a week later. Right. And I think when I was in med school, I think the statistic was then, and I'm sure it's very similar now, that a third of all healthcare dollars are spent in the last 3 weeks of life. Yeah, and so you think about all the stuff we do, right, to prevent that end moment. Whereas we know somebody's about to die. Is it today? Is it tomorrow? Is it next week? Like we can prolong that. But why is that really helping anybody? right? And whereas for this, it's like, how do we live healthier longer? How do we take our healthy days and extend them longer and longer? And I think that's what we're trying to do. I feel like we do that with skin really well now. I feel pretty good about my skin. I've just came from the gym, right? So I got no makeup on and I've got nothing, but I do have sunblock on. But the rest of our bodies, so we can keep playing tennis or pickleball or skiing or biking.
Yeah,
for
sort of
longer.
the mantra for the big gurus of longevity medicine. And there's some really smart people working on this stuff. I'm kind of amazed at some of the people who are and some of the stuff they're doing. But the mantra is they want to die young at a very old age.
Right. Yeah.
But that's it. Stay healthy longer. And by the way, skincare, as you were mentioning, is, there's more and more understanding of how skincare and skin health both informs your general body health, your internal health, and reflects it. So it's hard to have really healthy looking skin if you're unhealthy internally.
That is for sure. Yeah.
And,
Well,
I mean,
if I have a patient who walks in and they're my age or anywhere within a decade of my age and they're a smoker, they look like several decades older, right?
Yeah.
It's awful, awful for your skin. The other thing I think is just sun damage. Like people just do not protect their skin at all from the sun. So what about diet? Do you make recommendations around diet as well?
To some extent. Mostly what I recommend is intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. Try to limit your meals to 8 hours a day, and then you're fasting the rest of the time. And that goes back to really the origins of this whole thing, which is caloric restriction. And that's been known for 100 years, that if you restrict an animal's caloric intake, it will live substantially longer and be healthier by a lot of measures. But the degree of caloric restriction required to do that is impractical. So the whole kind of goal of a lot of this is to find out what is driving that longevity change and how can we mimic that? How can we manipulate that without starving ourselves? And to some extent, you can get that with intermittent fasting because you will shift into this altered metabolism once a day. And that seems to be helpful. That is also why, if you remember, resveratrol was kind of the big hot topic for a while. And it's still a good skincare product, but it was the first, what are known as caloric restriction mimetics. It was the first thing you could take that would trigger the same metabolic change of caloric restriction. But it has poor bioavailability, so as a supplement, it doesn't really do that same thing. But that's kind of been the goal of a lot of that, is just to try to get that same effect without having to starve yourself all the time.
Is the caloric restriction, I'm assuming, the effect on longevity, right? Is that obviously not to the point of losing weight, but it's restricting. The way I understand it, people in the kind of paleo primal world talk about the way our ancestors lived, where, there wasn't any food. You'd be gathering, eat, vegetables as you find them. And then once every however many weeks, the hunters would bring home a animal, and then people would get this giant dose of protein and then nothing again for quite a long time. So they lived that way, right? So does intermittent fasting do something similar enough in a way that your metabolism daily goes into this, not starvation exactly, but
it does a little bit. It does a little bit. And that's the thinking that what drives this effect is that it is an adaptation to periods of inadequate food availability. And it's a really fundamental kind of thing. It happens in yeast, and it happens in small animals, and it happens in humans. So it's really a primal thing. And I don't know if I buy the whole idea about you kind of eating, having your meat once every 2 weeks. I don't think their average lifespan was particularly long. So
right.
But that is kind of what is behind all this.
So if someone's going to do intermittent fasting, it's keep all your eating during the day within an 8-hour period.
Yeah, and it's easy to do. It's just basically skip breakfast.
Okay.
And
don't eat after a certain time of the evening.
Yeah, and it's not a great idea to eat more than, any later than about an hour and a half before bedtime anyway. It does interfere with sleep a little bit and so forth.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And do you think that so I keep bringing up GLP-1s because we've talked on this podcast quite a bit, but Does that affect also then caloric restriction overall? Because it's certainly easier to do if you're on a GLP-1.
Oh, I think so. But what an interesting question. I don't really know specifically, but it seems like it would be because it's suppressing appetite. You just don't
Hmm.
feel like eating as much.
It's really easy to skip a meal
Yeah.
if you're not hungry. I lost 22 pounds on tirzepatide, and wow, it was like kind of amazing. I mean, like it's just life changing for me. It was really amazing.
Yeah. The challenge with those is keeping them available, for
Well,
people who
yeah, I
have
mean, that's a
restrictions.
whole other discussion. I mean, we can't get compounded tirzepatide or semaglutide anymore, so we're kind of phasing that out of our
Yeah.
practice. But it's a really interesting discussion about how it's just harder to get now, and you have to get it through Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly's busy suing everybody who is trying to not do that.
Yeah.
So we still have a few vials left that we purchased before that was all shut down. But yeah, we're closing off that whole
Yeah. That's
program.
a
And
shame. A lot of people will be disadvantaged by that.
I know it's terrible. I mean, I personally think that GLP-1s are going to save a lot of lives. I think it needs to be more widely available, and I do think it'll probably go back on the shortage list because imposing this on people is really
Mhm.
taking it away from like a lot of people who really
Yeah.
need it. But I would imagine, my guess is that GLP-1s would really help with lifespan. It just everything about it makes sense to me. Undoing diabetes, undoing even pre-diabetes, losing weight, intermittent fasting. Like it just seems like a no-brainer to me. Is there anything else that you're doing in your longevity practice that you'd like to bring up that we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, there's something that is, I think, very interesting and very new, which is called therapeutic plasma exchange.
Oh,
And
tell me about that.
oh yeah, it's quite a story. The origins of this came from studies where they would give an older animal plasma from a younger animal, and the older animal would get younger. It would
Yeah.
actually, its gray hair would turn dark again, and it would be more active, and it solved mazes faster, and so
How
forth.
did
So
they not reject that? They
well,
proved.
in a laboratory setting, they're kind of strains of animals that are bred to be genetically similar. That's kind of been an interesting thing for a while. And so, similar to plasmapheresis, which is done for a lot of other conditions. But
Do you want
what
to
they,
explain to our audience what that is, and how plasma
yeah,
exchange is different?
so plasmapheresis is where you're connected to a machine that draws blood out of one line, it separates out your blood plasma, replaces it with something, then gives you your blood cells and the new fluid back in. So if you have, for example, an autoimmune disease and you want to get rid of the autoantibodies, it's a way of filtering those out, or heavy metals or microplastics, things like that. It's a way of getting those things out of your system. So this new version of it, it was to me one of the most fascinating studies that they've done because they took all of the aging biomarker panels that they could find, and there are about 35 of them now, all of these epigenetic biological age studies. And they did a randomized prospective trial with a sham control. And that's, I think, the most interesting part of this is just the idea
Huh.
that they got people to consent to be hooked up to this machine for 2 hours, have their blood taken out, run through, and just given back to them without an actual treatment. But they had to have a legitimate control arm for this. But
That's
the
pretty
people,
cool.
and then
You'd
they
have to
tried two
pay me
different,
kind of a lot of money for that, but
yeah, oh, that's kind of one problem is all of these sorts of studies, when they're done right, they cost a lot of money to do.
yeah.
But anyway, so they tested a couple of different protocols and they found one that was consistently reversing age markers after a series of treatments. So to me,
Wow.
that's right now, that is the only thing that is an interventional treatment that is proven in a randomized prospective controlled trial to reverse aging. So
And have you done this in your practice?
we're just bringing it in.
So you're taking someone's blood out, you're
Mhm.
running it through a machine and putting it back in?
Yeah, so you're
Okay.
replacing it with albumin, which is the main
Hmm.
protein in your blood, and gamma globulin. So,
So I assume I'm just going to ask you, like, if I were the patient, right,
mhm.
coming in, okay, so my blood's going through some tubing. Obviously, the tubing, that's brand new. Like the
Mhm.
machine, how do you make sure that it's clean and there's no cross contamination? Like, is this
Yeah,
medical
so that
machine?
it's a new sterile kit for each treatment. So all of the
Hmm.
tubing, all of the stuff is unique to each treatment.
Okay.
The machine is just the pump basically that runs all
Okay.
this. So
Okay.
yeah, there's no issue of cross-contamination that way.
Because I've said on the podcast before, like there's no quicker way to kill somebody than to hang the wrong thing in an IV.
Right.
That's how that lady in Texas died, which, by the way, there's a new law that just got signed that has her name on it. But anyway, this would also be up there with, I would not trust very many people with this. Like it would be very, like, I trust you. There'd be very few people that I would trust to take my blood out and put it back in. So
I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is just important for people as they go, looking around for providers. This is one of the things that's really important to me is people understand the parts are where you really, really have to find an expert who's really well trained, who is trustworthy. You cannot go to some rando and have this done. You go to some random person who might potentially do something crazy like this to you. I would not trust them with a 10-foot pole, right? So are you doing your own kind of little personal trial for this, or how are you gonna do it yourself?
We're hoping to convince enough people to actually do their aging biomarker studies. But we're not requiring it. I mean, we have information that it's effective. I would love for everybody to do it, but the costs, it's not an inexpensive treatment. So.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds really interesting to me. I would be interested in I'll have to come up there. That's so very interesting. So how much do you need multiple treatments? Is it a series?
Yeah, it's a series. Ideally, you would do at least 3 sessions. I would like you to do 2 within the first week and then sort of maintenance after that.
Is there any downtime after that?
No.
No, you feel great afterwards?
I got it done and I went out for a hike that afternoon. It was great.
Okay, awesome. How long does it take?
About 2.5 hours.
Okay, good to know. All right. Factor in the hour drive for me. So, all right. Well, just planning ahead. Okay. Well, that sounds really interesting. I would love to see more data in these kinds of things. Like it's just really hard to know. Like I think most of us would want to live healthier longer, right? So what makes total sense to do, right? What are the things you can do for not much money? What are the things that you can do that are not too taxing? And then things like this, that sounds like kind of big, right? And for whom does this make sense? Or over time, is this everyone going to do this? We're all going to live to 112? I don't know.
Possibly. There are people who talk about kind of radical lifespan extension. I think they're not mainstream, but they're not foolish people either. They're just very excited about the technology. Yeah, and you were just kind of getting at what it costs to do these kinds of studies and to do them right. And so many of these things kind of live in that in-between world, like a lot of the peptide treatments that we do. They're available and not terribly expensive, but the cost of doing a randomized prospective trial with validated markers for your endpoints, it would be just daunting, it'd be a really, really expensive study to do, and that would drive up the cost of the product.
Right.
And that's one of the issues with the Circulate trial, and that's why it's expensive to do, because the trial was really expensive to conduct.
Right. I think that there are some companies, so not all of them do this, but I think there are some companies that will do like real actual research trials with the private sector, with clinics like yours and mine, although I haven't participated in anything like this. But it's sort of a hybrid way of doing a trial. I just think that more of them are needed because it's so hard to know. It's hard to make recommendations for patients when it's like, well, we don't really have enough data. We have an N of 1. Well, that was me. I did it. And I that makes it a lot harder. I think we're coming close to time. Is there anything else? What's the 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you would give to people listening when it comes to longevity and anti-aging?
Yeah, I would say really be educated about this. Don't just kind of, go after what's trending or what's popular. They can download my biohacking longevity booklet from my website, which is drbaxter.com, and go to resources and documents and download it for free. The reason I put it there and make it available is because I update it all the time. It's a book that would be, out of date within 6 months if it was in print somewhere. So I try to have that as a guide for what really works, what might work, but we don't really know yet, and what really probably doesn't work. And that's the idea, is just to kind of get some advice from somebody who's kind of taken all this stuff seriously and not just out to make a buck.
Well, that's great advice, and I'm going to go download that myself right now. And we'll definitely have a link to your website in our show notes. Do you want to let our audience know how they can get in touch with you or find your office or your social?
Yeah, so I'm in Mount Lake Terrace. It's drbaxter.com is the website, just drbaxter.com. Easy to find me.
And that's Washington State, near
That's
Seattle.
Washington State, yes.
Right.
Yeah, just north of Seattle.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Baxter, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really just learned a ton. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation again, and it's been so nice reconnecting after this little time. So I appreciate it.
If you've learned something and like what we're doing, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. If you have a question or a crazy story of your own you'd like to share, please send an email or voice recording to info@drkatedee.com. That's drkatedee.com. Or reach us through the website, MedSpaMayhem.com. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Thanks for listening. This has been MedSpa Mayhem with Dr. Kate D. We are so grateful you're listening, and we hope you've learned at least one fun or possibly disturbing fact today. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star review. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Links and more can be found in the show notes and on medspamayhem.com.